Julian Thorne believed he owned the world, and in a way he did. From the 80th floor of his obsidian tower, the city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board he could plug into or shut down at will. His name was a verb in the financial world. To Thorne, a company was to acquire it, strip it for parts, and leave the carcass for the vultures. He was ruthless, efficient, and profoundly, deeply empty. He wore $1,000 suits that felt like armor and cologne, that announced his arrival long before he entered a room. He had a different supermodel on his arm for every gala, their laughter echoing in the marble hallways of his penthouse, but the sound never reached his eyes. His eyes were chips of ice reflecting the cold, hard numbers that governed his life. He had everything a man could want, and nothing that a soul could need. This hollowness had not always been there. It had crept in slowly, then all at once on the day he buried his mother, Eleanor. She was the one person who had seen the boy behind the billionaire, the one who called him Jules and reminded him to water the plants. She was his anchor, his true north. When she died, the compass of his life shattered. The grief was a physical thing, a cold stone in his chest that no amount of money or power could warm. He'd tried. He bought islands, yachts, even a controlling stake in a space exploration company. He was trying to buy his way out of the gravitational pull of his own sorrow, but it was a black hole. So he became colder, harder. He saw the world as a reflection of his own cynicism. Everyone had a price. Everyone was playing an angle. Love, loyalty, kindness, these were just commodities to be traded. He started to see his mother's memory not as a comfort, but as a weakness. A vulnerability he had to pave over with steel and concrete. He stopped visiting her grave. He put her photos in a drawer. He tried to forget the smell of her baking, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her hand in his. He built his empire higher and higher, a monument to his own isolation, hoping if he got high enough he could forget the earth where she lay. But he was just a man, standing on a pile of money, shouting at a god he no longer believed in. And in his profound boredom, in his arrogant despair, an idea began to form. A cruel, simple, and very public game. He would prove, once and for all, that he was right about the world. He would show everyone that humanity was just a pack of hungry dogs waiting for a scrap from his table. He summoned his marketing team, a group of terrified but brilliant young people who hung on his every word. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the dying sun. "I want a contest," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "A public challenge. We'll call it the Thorne Impression." The rules were simple. Anyone from any walk of life could have 5 minutes of his time. All they had to do was impress him. Truly, genuinely impress him. The prize, $10 million. Cash. The announcement would run on every network, every social media platform. It was a spectacle of wealth and power. But for Julian, it was something more. It was an experiment to confirm his own bleak hypothesis about the human condition. It was a challenge thrown not at the world, but at the ghost of his mother's faith in it. He was about to learn that the most profound truths don't come from a spreadsheet, but from the last place you'd ever expect. The announcement hit the world like a sonic boom. The Thorne Impression became an overnight phenomenon. News channels debated the ethics of it. Psychologists analyzed Julian's motives on talk shows. But for the general public, it was the ultimate lottery ticket. It wasn't about luck, it was about talent, about wit, about having that one special spark that could catch the eye of the man who had everything. The applications flooded in by the millions. Julian's team set up a filtration system, a series of preliminary interviews to weed out the obviously unhinged. But even so, the line of hopefuls that snaked around Thorne Tower was a testament to the seductive power of that 8-figure prize. It was a circus of human ambition. Julian sat on a custom-made leather throne in a sterile white boardroom, looking more like an emperor than a CEO. The first week was a parade of the absurd. A man who could supposedly bend spoons with his mind ended up just trembling with effort, sweating through his cheap suit. A woman presented him with a binder full of plans for a machine that could turn seawater into gold. It was scientifically illiterate nonsense. There were singers with mediocre voices, dancers with clumsy feet, inventors with impossible gadgets. A man juggled chainsaws. Julian had him removed by security before he even finished. He was bored. He was more than bored. He was irritated. Each performance, each desperate plea for his approval, only served to prove his point. They were all clowns. They didn't want to impress him. They just wanted his money. He grew more callous with each passing day. He'd cut people off mid-sentence. "No, you're not impressive. You're wasting my time. Next." He would scroll through stock tickers on his phone while a poet poured their heart out in verse. He smirked when a self-proclaimed guru tried to teach him the path to enlightenment. "My path," Julian had sneered, "is paved with the quarterly earnings reports of companies I've crushed. Try to be more enlightened than that." The cruelty was a shield. With every person he dismissed, he felt a sick sense of validation. "See?" he would think to himself, a silent conversation with his mother's ghost. "This is what they are. This is the humanity you believed in. A lineup of jesters and fools dancing for my gold." The public, watching clips of these rejections online, began to turn on him. He was labeled a monster, a tyrant, a modern-day Caligula, but he didn't care. Public opinion was just another stock to be shorted. His own staff walked on eggshells around him. The atmosphere in Thorn Tower was suffocating. The contest was supposed to be a distraction, a way to feel something, but the only thing he felt was a deeper, more profound emptiness. The $10 million was nothing to him. He could lose that in a bad trade and not even notice. The money was just bait. The true prize for him was the confirmation of his own nihilism. He wanted to be proven right in his misery, because if everyone else was as hollow and greedy as he was, then his own emptiness didn't feel so lonely. It just felt like the state of the world. But on the final day, just as he was about to cancel the whole charade, an entry appeared that would not just challenge his wallet, but the very foundation of his reality. The final day of the contest was bleak. A grey, drizzling rain washed over the city, mirroring the mood inside Thorn Tower. Julian had already decided to end it. He'd instructed his team to prepare a press release announcing that no one had met the challenge. He was sitting in his boardroom, the leather of his chair groaning as he shifted, when his head of security, a large, stoic man named Marcus, buzzed his private line. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice hesitant, "there's one last appointment. A child." Julian scoffed. "A child? Are you serious, Marcus? Did we run out of sword swallowers and bad magicians?" "He's been waiting for 3 days, sir. He just sits in the lobby quietly. Doesn't cause any trouble. Says he has to see you." Julian was about to say no to tell Marcus to send the boy home with a lollipop and a pat on the head, but a flicker of something, morbid curiosity perhaps, stopped him. A child. What could a child possibly do to impress him? Recite the alphabet backwards? Build a Lego tower? The sheer audacity of it was, in a strange way, the first interesting thing that had happened all week. "Fine," Julian sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Send him in, but this is the last one. Then we are done." The heavy oak doors to the boardroom swung open, and in walked a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He was small for his age, with wide, serious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore jeans that were slightly faded, a clean but well-worn blue hoodie, and sneakers with the laces tied in a neat double knot. He was the antithesis of everything the room represented. The room was a monument to cold, hard success. The massive mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine. The art on the walls was worth more than a suburban neighborhood. The air itself smelled of power and money. And into this temple of capital walked a small, ordinary boy. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look intimidated. He just looked present. He walked to the other end of the long table and stood there, his hands politely clasped behind his back. Julian leaned forward, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. This would be amusing, at least, a final piece of dark comedy before the curtain fell. "All right, kid," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The clock is ticking. You have 5 minutes to impress me. Dazzle me. What's your talent? Do you sing? Do you have a sob story about a sick puppy? Let's hear it." The boy didn't answer right away. He just looked at Julian, his gaze steady and unnervingly calm. There was no fear in his eyes. There was something else. Pity? No, that couldn't be it. It was a look of profound understanding, and it made the hair on Julian's arm stand up. "What's your name?" Julian demanded, his irritation growing. "Leo," the boy said, his voice clear and soft. "And I don't have a talent, sir." Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "No talent? Then what in God's name are you doing here? Did you get lost on a school trip?" Leo simply shook his head. "I'm not here to perform for you." he said calmly. "I'm here to deliver a message." Julian rolled his eyes, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "A message? I've got a team of 1,000 people to deliver messages. You've wasted your time, and now you're wasting mine." He was about to press the intercom to have Marcus escort the boy out, but then Leo closed his eyes, and as the boy looked up, meeting his cold gaze, Julian had no idea he was about to stare into the eyes of his own past. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. Julian's finger hovered over the intercom button, his patience completely gone. He was done with this farce. A boy with a message. It was pathetic. "Get out," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "Now." But Leo didn't move. His eyes remained closed, his small face serene. He took a slow, deep breath, and when he spoke again, the world tilted on its axis. The voice that came from the boy's lips was not his own. It was a woman's voice. A voice Julian hadn't heard in 2 years, yet one that was etched into every fiber of his being. A voice that was both warm and commanding, laced with a faint, unmistakable accent from the old country. It was the voice of his mother. "Jules," the voice said, and the nickname hit Julian like a physical blow. No one called him Jules. No one had dared to since she died. "You forgot to water the hydrangeas again. They'll be all wilted by now." Julian froze. His hand dropped from the intercom. His heart, a cold, dormant stone in his chest, suddenly hammered against his ribs. The hydrangeas. His mother had planted a small bush of blue hydrangeas on the terrace of his penthouse, one of the few personal touches she'd insisted on. After her death, he'd neglected them. He never went out on the terrace anymore. He hadn't even thought about them. How could this boy know? How? His mind, a finely tuned machine of logic and reason, sputtered and failed. He stared at Leo, whose eyes were still closed, his body just a vessel for that impossible sound. "What is this?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "What kind of sick trick is this?" He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He circled the table, his eyes darting around the room, searching for hidden speakers, for a wire, for any sign of a technological deception. This had to be a trick, a sophisticated, cruel, and deeply personal prank. Someone had coached this kid. They'd fed him information, but the hydrangeas, that was obscure, that was intimate. That was not something you could find in a public record or a tabloid magazine. The boy, or rather, the voice, spoke again. "Always so suspicious, my Jules. You never believed in anything you couldn't touch or buy." It was her tone, her exact cadence, the gentle chiding he had heard 1,000 times. He was standing right in front of Leo now, looming over him. The boy was so small, so fragile. "Who sent you?" Julian demanded, his voice a raw mix of fury and fear. "Who are you working for?" Leo opened his eyes. They were his own again, just the wide, serious eyes of a 10-year-old boy. The spell was broken. "I don't know what you mean," Leo said, his own soft voice returning. "She just talks sometimes, when someone is hurting." Julian felt a wave of vertigo. He stumbled back, clutching the edge of the massive table to steady himself. His meticulously constructed world, a world of numbers and assets and predictable outcomes, was shattering into a million pieces. This wasn't a trick. His gut, the same instinct that had made him billions, told him so. This was something else, something impossible, something terrifying, and something that was just getting started. This boy hadn't come for his money. He had come for his soul. Panic clawed at Julian's throat. His mind, his greatest asset, was failing him. It was a computer trying to process a ghost. He paced the length of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time in years. He looked at Leo, who sat down in one of the oversized chairs, his small feet dangling far from the floor. The boy looked tired, drained. Julian's mind raced through the possibilities. A disgruntled former employee? A business rival with an elaborate scheme? He had enemies, hundreds of them. Anyone would love to see him mentally unravel. This had to be it. They'd done deep research, hired a child actor, a voice mimic. "It's a lie," Julian said, more to convince himself than the boy. "It's all a lie." He pulled out his phone, ready to call his head of security and have the entire building locked down, to have this boy and his parents, or handlers, investigated and ruined. "Leo," he said, his voice sharp and menacing, Tell me who put you up to this, and I might be lenient." Leo just shook his head, a sad, knowing look on his face. "No one put me up to anything," he said quietly. "I told you. I deliver messages." "Then do it again," Julian challenged, his voice laced with desperate bravado. "Say something else. Something only she would know. Go on. Impress me." He regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. He was daring the universe, and he had a sinking feeling he was about to lose. Leo closed his eyes again. The now familiar stillness settled over him. Julian held his breath, his body rigid with anticipation and dread. And then, the voice returned. Eleanor's voice. "You still keep my locket in your top desk drawer, don't you? The silver one with the tiny scratch near the clasp." Julian's blood ran cold. He froze, his gaze darting to the massive oak desk at the end of the room. It was true. After the funeral, he had taken her favorite locket, a simple silver oval, and hidden it away. He'd never told anyone. He'd put it in the back of the drawer, under a pile of old, irrelevant papers, as if burying it could bury the pain. He had never looked at it again. "The day I gave it to you," the voice continued, soft and reminiscent, "you had fallen off your bicycle and scraped your knee. You were crying so hard. I told you the locket was magic, that it would keep you safe. You stopped crying right away." A memory, sharp and vivid, pierced through the fog of Julian's carefully constructed apathy. He was 6 years old. The sting of the pavement, the taste of tears and dirt, his mother's arms around him, her voice a warm blanket, the cool metal of the locket against his skin. It was a memory so private, so deeply buried, he had all but forgotten it himself. No investigator could have found that. No rival could have known. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a trick. A terrible, earth-shattering truth began to dawn on him. He was not being scammed. He was being haunted. And the ghost had chosen a 10-year-old boy as its messenger. The titan of industry, the man who bent the world to his will, was completely and utterly powerless. The walls of the boardroom felt like they were closing in. The air was thick, heavy with the impossible. Julian stumbled over to his desk, his legs unsteady. With a trembling hand, he pulled open the top drawer. He rummaged past old checkbooks and forgotten contracts, his fingers searching for the object he hadn't touched in 2 years. There it was, the silver locket. Cool, solid, real. He picked it up, and his thumb instinctively found the tiny scratch near the clasp. A choked sob escaped his lips. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. He sank into his chair, the locket clutched in his fist, his fortress of cynicism reduced to rubble. "Why?" he whispered to the boy, to the room, to the ghost he could not see. "Why are you doing this?" Leo's eyes were still closed, but a single tear traced a path down his cheek. The voice that answered was no longer gentle or reminiscent. It was filled with a profound sorrow, a mother's disappointment. "Because I don't recognize my own son," Eleanor's voice said, each word a carefully aimed dart. "I raised a boy who was kind, a boy who would share his lunch with a friend who had none. I raised a man who promised me he would use his brilliance to build things, not just to break them." The voice grew stronger, firmer. "This contest, this cruelty, making people dance for your amusement like a bored king. Do you think this is power, Jules? This isn't power, it's fear. You're so afraid of the hole I left in your heart that you've decided to carve a hole in the rest of the world to match it." Julian flinched as if he'd been slapped. Every word was true. He had become a monster, not out of malice, but out of pain. He had weaponized his grief, turning it outwards on everyone else because he couldn't bear to face it himself. "You visit my company's stock price more often than you visit my grave," the voice continued, relentless. "You fill your house with strangers, but your soul is empty. You honor my memory by becoming everything I taught you not to be. You think this armor of wealth protects you? It's a cage, Jules. And you locked yourself inside." The words weren't just accusations, they were a diagnosis, a perfect soul-stripping analysis of the man he had become. He had spent 2 years running from his mother's death, and now she had found him in the one place he thought he was untouchable, his temple of power. He looked at the small boy in the chair, a conduit for this unbearable truth. This child was channeling the one voice in the universe that could strip him of all his defenses. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the billionaire titan. He was just Jules, a son being scolded by his mother, a lost little boy who had scraped his knee and was being reminded that he had forgotten the way home. The rebuke was absolute, not because it was angry, but because it was delivered with a foundation of unwavering, heartbreaking love. It was the voice of the one person who knew his darkness and had loved him anyway. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the ice around his heart began to crack. He wasn't just facing a ghost, he was facing himself. The dam broke. The carefully constructed walls of arrogance and indifference that Julian had spent 2 years building came crashing down in a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion. He put his head in his hands, the cold metal of the locket pressing into his forehead, and he wept. Not silent, dignified tears, but wrenching, guttural sobs that shook his entire body. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 2 years and had finally been forced to exhale. The sound of grief, of shame, of a loneliness so profound it had almost consumed him. He wept for his mother. He wept for the man he was supposed to become. He wept for the hollow, gilded cage he had built for himself. In the cavernous boardroom, surrounded by the trappings of his immense wealth, he was just a man, stripped bare. The $1,000 suit felt like a costume. The view of the city he owned felt like a mockery. None of it mattered. None of it could touch the pain that was now pouring out of him. The voice had stopped. The room was silent, save for his own ragged breathing. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen, and saw Leo watching him. The boy's face was no longer impassive. It was filled with a deep, almost adult-like empathy. He wasn't judging him, he was simply bearing witness to his collapse. "I miss her," Julian choked out, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. It was the simplest truth, and the one he had most fiercely denied. "I miss her so much." He began to talk, the words tumbling out of him, a confession to this strange, small priest. "I thought if I just kept moving, if I made more money, if I became more powerful, I thought I could outrun it," he said, his voice hoarse. "But it's always there. In the morning, when I wake up, the first thing I think is that I can't call her. Every deal I close, I want to tell her about it, but I can't." He looked around the room, at the symbols of his success that now seemed so pathetic. This contest, it was despicable. I know that. I think I did it because I was so angry. Angry at her for leaving me. Angry at the world for just and continuing. I wanted to prove that it was all meaningless, that kindness and love were a sham, because if they were real, then my loss was real too, and that was too much to bear. It was a moment of absolute vulnerability. The great Julian Thorne, the predator of the financial world, admitting his weakness to a 10-year-old child. He was confessing that his entire persona, the cold-hearted tyrant, was a lie. A defense mechanism against a pain he did not know how to process. He had treated the world with cruelty because he felt the universe had been cruel to him first. He had pushed everyone away because the person he most wanted to be close to was gone forever. He finally looked Leo in the eye, the last of his pride falling away. "She was my anchor," he whispered, "and I'm lost at sea." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. It was the most genuine thing he had said or done in years. He had finally admitted the truth, not to impress anyone, but because he could no longer carry the weight of the lie. After Julian's confession, a profound stillness settled in the room. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, feeling drained but somehow lighter. The heavy armor he had been wearing for 2 years was gone, and while he felt exposed, he also felt like he could breathe again. He looked at Leo, who had remained silent throughout his breakdown, a small, patient figure in the large, imposing chair. The boy's own voice returned, soft and steady, breaking the silence. "I know," he said. "It hurts. My mom says it's like a piece of you is missing and your body keeps trying to find it." Julian frowned, confused. "Your mom?" he asked, his voice still rough. "She's not gone, is she?" Leo shook his head. "No, but my dad is. He was a fireman. He went into a burning building to save someone, and he didn't come back out." He said it so matter-of-factly, with a child's simple acceptance of a devastating truth. "It happened 3 years ago. For a whole year, my mom wouldn't get out of bed. She just cried. The whole house felt grey." Julian listened, captivated. For the first time, he was seeing this boy not as a supernatural conduit or a contestant, but as a person, a child who had his own deep well of grief. "And then one day," Leo continued, looking at his hands, "I was sitting with her and I just felt it, this big warm feeling, and I started talking, but it was my dad's voice. I told her his favorite bad joke, the one about the penguin, She was so shocked she actually laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in a year. Julian stared at him, beginning to understand. So this gift, it's not just for me. No, Leo said, shaking his head. It just happens sometimes. When the hurt is really big, it's like I'm a radio and sometimes I can pick up a station that no one else can hear. I don't control it. I was just walking past your building every day on my way to the library, and the feeling coming from this place was so loud. It was like a siren. It was the saddest place I'd ever felt. The boy's simple explanation was more profound than anything Julian's therapists had ever told him. This wasn't a curse or a magic trick. It was, in its own strange way, a form of empathy. Leo was a child who had processed his own loss by becoming a vessel for others to process theirs. He wasn't a performer seeking a prize. He was a healer, drawn to the pain of others. The irony was staggering. Julian had set up a contest looking for someone impressive, thinking of inventors, artists, and titans of industry. He was looking for a reflection of himself. Instead, the universe had sent him the complete opposite. A humble, quiet boy, whose only power was his connection to human suffering. A boy who had no interest in money, only in mending what was broken. So you came here, for 3 days, just because you felt I was sad? Julian asked, his voice filled with a sense of wonder he hadn't felt since he was a child himself. Leo nodded. I thought maybe if you heard her, the loud, sad feeling would get quieter. The purpose of the room had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a stage for a cruel contest. It had become a space of healing, of confession, of a strange and profound connection between a grieving billionaire and a 10-year-old psychic. Julian looked at the official contest document on his desk, the one with the $10 million figure printed in bold. The words seemed absurd, meaningless. The entire premise of the contest, to be impressed, had been turned on its head. He had been impressed, more than he could ever have imagined, but not by a performance. He had been shattered, rebuilt, and humbled by a genuine, unexplainable human, or perhaps inhuman, experience. He looked at Leo, who was now fidgeting slightly, as if the energy in the room was returning to normal, and he was once again just a boy in a very large office. You did it, Leo, Julian said, a small, genuine smile forming on his face for the first time. You impressed me. He picked up a pen, his hand steady now, and signed the document with a flourish. He slid it across the vast, polished table. $10 million. It's yours. For a moment, Leo just stared at the paper. He didn't reach for it. He didn't gasp. He didn't show any of the greed or elation Julian had expected from every other contestant. Instead, he just shook his head. I don't want it, he said simply. Julian was taken aback. What? Of course you want it. It's $10 million. You can do anything with it. Buy your mom a new house. Never have to worry about anything ever again. My mom says we have everything we need, Leo replied, his logic pure and unshakable. We have our apartment, we have food, and we have each other. That's what's important. He pushed the paper back across the table towards Julian. That was never the prize. The prize was making the sad feeling go quiet. In that moment, Julian Thorne felt a sense of shame and awe so profound it almost brought him to his knees again. This child, who had every right to the money, who had earned it in the most spectacular way possible, was teaching him the lesson his mother had tried to impart her whole life. That wealth is not measured in dollars, but in connection. That value is not found in possessions, but in peace. Julian had set a price on being impressed, but Leo had delivered something that was priceless. He had given him a conversation with his dead mother. He had given him a mirror to his own soul. He had given him a path out of his self-imposed prison. How could you put a number on that? The $10 million felt like a cheap insult in the face of such a gift. Julian realized that giving Leo the money would be the easy way out. It would turn this sacred, transformative experience back into a simple transaction. It would allow him to revert to the man who solves every problem by writing a check. But Leo and his mother's ghost deserved more than that. The moment wasn't about a financial transaction. It was about a human transformation. He had to make a different kind of payment. Julian looked at the signed document, then back at the small boy who had so effortlessly dismantled his entire worldview. Leo was right. Giving him the money would be a betrayal of the very lesson he had just learned. It would be an end, not a beginning. Julian slowly tore the document in half, then in half again. The sound of the ripping paper was the sound of a contract being broken, the contract he had made with his own cynicism. Leo watched him, a curious but unsurprised look in his eyes. "The contest is over," Julian announced, more to himself than to the boy. "It was a mistake." He pressed the intercom, his voice clear and firm, resonating with a purpose it hadn't had in years. "Marcus," he said, "cancel the press release about the contest. Draft a new one. The $10 million and an additional $90 million from my personal funds will be used to establish a new charitable foundation." His team, listening in from the outer office, was stunned into silence. "What will we call the foundation, sir?" Marcus asked after a moment. Julian looked at the silver locket still resting on his desk. He smiled, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. "We'll call it the Eleanor Foundation," he said. "Its mission will be to support families, especially children, who have lost a parent. It will fund grief counseling, educational scholarships, and community support networks. Its goal will not be to make money, but to heal." He was building something new, not another cold glass tower, but a foundation of compassion. He was honoring his mother, not by hoarding wealth in her name, but by giving it away in her spirit. His gaze fell back on Leo. "That doesn't mean you get nothing," Julian said. He thought for a moment. "You said you walk to the library every day. Do you like to read?" Leo's eyes lit up. "It's my favorite place in the world." Julian's smile widened. "The Eleanor Foundation's first official act will be to make a grant to your local library. We will completely refurbish it. New books, new computers, a new children's wing. We'll name it the Leo Section." It was a better prize than money. It was a gift that would keep on giving, a tribute to the boy's simple love of knowledge, and it was a promise. Julian wouldn't just be writing a check. He would be involved. He would see it through. Later that day, Julian Thorne did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He left the office early. He didn't go to a board meeting or a fancy dinner. He drove to the city cemetery. He bought a small pot of blue hydrangeas on the way. He knelt by his mother's grave, the cool grass dampening his expensive trousers, and he placed the flowers by her headstone. He told her all about the boy. He told her he was sorry, and he told her he was finally ready to come home. Weeks later, Julian stood with Leo in the newly renovated library, the smell of fresh paint and new books in the air. He was no longer the hollow king in his tower. He was just a man learning to live again. He had offered $10 million to anyone who could impress him. In the end, he was saved by a small boy who didn't want the money, who had spoken in his mother's voice and reminded him of a simple, forgotten truth. The greatest wealth we can ever hope to have is the love we leave behind, and the love we are brave enough to let in. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.